You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Brooklyn, yo.
All right, everybody, just like we promised, coming back in here, we'll see if everybody wants to get back in and re-engage with us right now. Obviously, episodes like this live on YouTube. We'll put these out on the podcast feed as well, so be sure to keep your eyes out for it. But I wanted to hop back in and have a little bit of the discussion around the Brooklyn Nets and obviously the Kyrie Irving trade request. Doug and I just did about an hour discussing the somewhat surprising, maybe it shouldn't have been surprising news of the Kyrie Irving trade request, first reported by Shams Charania. We've gotten some additional context from Adrian Wojnarowski around some potential trade partners. Already, you're starting to hear some teams that are at least willing to explore it. There's two things that I wanted to come back in and do. One, maybe talk a little bit deeper around some of these potential trade partners, of which there are a handful, but the remaining is obviously going to be primarily focused on the concern around what's the long term, as we give a shout out to Skills there in the YouTube comments. Everybody's hopefully start to roll in. I know this is like a double down on the conversation, but Doug and I talked about a little bit. We started to tap into what's the potential fallout here, right? And we also, though, started to wonder about what are other teams going to be willing to do. So there already was, remember, when we discussed this going back to the offseason, Kyrie Irving said at the start of this year, he went out, looked at the landscape, didn't necessarily see a lot of potential suitors out there for his services when he was granted permission to go seek a trade when their negotiations were stalling in the offseason. Now, in theory, he's been on the court minus the early season suspension and what went on there. He's been on the court. He's been healthy. He's been playing great basketball. And so you'd like to think that maybe the trade market is a little bit better. Even if it's going to be for a half a season rental and a playoff run. But a lot of what we look at too here is, do we think that this is a push around wanting the contract extension right now, wanting the security, which Doug and I discussed earlier, totally within his rights to want and to demand and to go after? Every player is going to push for that. Or is this simply, is it posturing or not, right? Does Kyrie Irving really want to go somewhere? Do the Brooklyn Nets really not want to extend him? Do they really want to trade him? And what is the potential issues that could arise here from Kevin Durant's standpoint? So tap into this a little bit and also discuss something that we didn't get into, which is what would the Nets do if they end up making a move with Kyrie Irving? So we hinted at it, but didn't get fully into that. The Ben Simmons piece would be interesting, and not even just in this season, but what does it mean beyond this year? And then there's a handful of trade partners that I thought would be interesting to take a look at too. So already these were thrown out by Bobby Marks, former actually front office member for the Brooklyn Nets. And it did really hit on a handful of names and teams that we had discussed. Some of the players that get mentioned are a little bit different. I had talked with Nick Angstadt, who is the host of the Locked On Mavericks podcast, because we threw that name out. This was Adrian Wojnarowski, who said the Mavericks it's already been confirmed that they will explore the possibility of what a trade could look like with Kyrie Irving and what that package would be. When I asked Nick Angstadt about it, and I had originally said, we discussed it earlier, a little bit earlier today, a Spencer Dinwiddie and Christian Wood. We've already heard that if the Mavericks could, they'd like to move on from a Christian Wood ahead of the deadline. Spencer Dinwiddie, obviously formerly with the Brooklyn Nets. Now, there could be a conflict there with the relationships with Kevin Durant and whether or not Spencer Dinwiddie and him can play well together. But at least from the Locked On Mavericks side of things, which is always a great feature of being on this network, being able to reach out to people, is Nick shot down the idea of Spencer Dinwiddie, said if you want to go ahead and put in a Tim Hardaway Jr. to that discussion, then you can start to get into the nitty gritty about Woods, Tim Hardaway Jr., and now what other assets are we maybe thinking about? Bobby Marks put out the idea of Dinwiddie, Bullock, and McGee. Again, the overarching theme around this in these discussions has been looking at teams that have expiring contracts. You're not talking necessarily about getting any younger players, which is what we had talked about earlier. And the issue that I would have when it comes specifically to this Mavericks possibility in the Bobby Marks version of it, I'm intrigued because I think Spencer Dinwiddie is obviously a scorer. He has 2 years left. He becomes not, this isn't a long-term thing. He just becomes now a player that you could turn around next year and look at exploring, moving him out to a contending team, someone who wants a contributor at that, in that backcourt position. And maybe you end up continuing to build some of the draft capital that you have. I put him above Tim Hardaway Jr. in terms of value. It's why 3 years left on his deal at just under 20 million. The Mavericks would want to maybe move off of his contract, obviously, but none of those really excite you, right? I mean, like, nothing about this package makes you terribly excited. The draft capital will be interesting here too. And it'll be interesting to see other players, bigger and higher. Well, I shouldn't say bigger names. There's not many bigger names than Kyrie Irving, but higher profile names right now around the deadline when it comes to an OG Anunoby and saying, well, young talent can be a core piece, is about to come up for his next big contract soon here as well. But if you're talking about 2, 3, 4 first round picks, we discussed earlier how it's not similar to Kevin Durant's offseason in so many ways. It is similar in some ways to James Harden, but it's also unique and unto itself, right? So how are you going to approach this if you're the Brooklyn Nets or any team and say, well, we'll give you expiring contracts. We're not going to give you young talent. And any capital we give you potentially is a little bit reduced because you're talking about, you would think, whether it's the Mavericks, the Lakers, the Clippers, we'll discuss here as well, the Miami Heat. If you're looking to make a run out of things this season, well, you're talking about back end of the first round draft picks. Those aren't anything guaranteed, obviously. And it's why it's a hard bargain here for the Brooklyn Nets, because it's not just you move them. But you're not going to get back a young core piece out of it. And you're also not going to get back exorbitant draft capital where you think, yeah, this is going to be a franchise rebuilding trade as well. So that is where you kind of go, okay, maybe we stare down the barrel of it. And this is what we said before, right? You say, hey, you want out, great. We'll revisit in the summer. The sign and trade will still be on the table then, and we'll explore those options. The hard part about that is obviously then in this season, you may not have Kyrie for the remainder of the year, though. Will he stay in and play his way out for the remainder of this year? So that's the Dallas Mavericks one. It doesn't excite me necessarily. But if you tell me that you're getting, again, can you get two first-round picks? I don't even know. It's hard to even discuss what that would look like. The other options that came up here as well, which kind of confirm what we had discussed, Doug and I, they said the Lakers, the Clippers, the Miami Heat. Now, the Lakers scenario I thought was a little bit interesting because it's the only one of any of these discussions where it included a second player for the Brooklyn Nets. Now, that's because you need to match the money anyway. And this was a Kyrie Irving and Joe Harris for Westbrook, along with Lonnie Walker and a first-round pick. Now, the other issue you bring up here is Kevin Durant, who played with Russell Westbrook at OKC, does he want to play with him again? And it was also being discussed here too. Think about the potential fit. So you're going to bring in Westbrook, and you're going to have Ben Simmons in theory. We'll talk about him in a minute too. What is that all going to add up to? Right? What is the product on the court in the short term going to be? Because the one thing I think that you're really going to be dangerously feathering here is still being competitive around Kevin Durant this year right now. And as soon as Kyrie Irving goes out the door, you dramatically reduce what the outlook of this team is for this season. I'll tap into the comment section over here too. So if anybody wants in on it, feel free. As I see, Zawar, what was the last thing you said here? My suggestion is take a break. This is a whole lot of noise over nothing. He's not getting traded. Yeah, it's interesting. And you also mentioned Dallas isn't making the Godfather offer of draft picks for Kyrie. Yeah, well, by the way, like, this is what's fascinating about it. What is the threshold on how much you'd be willing to give up for the rental? Like, let's assume out of these lists of teams, out of the list of teams that got included in this, my thinking is the Lakers, there's potential for longer term, because if LeBron's going to be there and you pair him with Kyrie and with AD, then all of a sudden you have a real opportunity to actually have some success beyond this season. So what you're willing to give up, maybe you'll part ways with a little bit more because you think you can keep him around. Dallas, I look at as would be a rental to me. The Clippers, that would be interesting beyond this season. Miami, I think, would be a beyond this season one if they were going to go down that road. And these are all teams that are being discussed. There's a couple other ones like the Suns and the Chicago Bulls that they're being floated out there, but they're weird in their own rights too. The best way to get a little bit of clarity on the Dallas Mavericks, though, would be to bring in one Nick Angstadt, who's on the broadcast right now.
So,
I don't give any heads up. I give no notification. I see somebody enter the back studio. They immediately
you send the text, you send the DM link, and then I'm on, baby.
Well, you know why too? Because for better or worse, the first one I discussed was the Dallas Mavericks and saying, "Hey, like, is this feasible?" So I mentioned that I was texting with you and over on Twitter as well, saying, "Hey, Spencer Dinwiddie." Now, what's funny is Bobby Marks, who I had said, he mentioned the Mavs as being a landing spot, Dinwiddie, Bullock, and McGee. So it's weird because I've listened to the Locked On Mavs show with you, obviously, and Isaac, and I know that the Mavericks would love to get rid of Christian Wood if they could. So, like, was that as much of the process for the Mavericks as anything? Is like, hey, what are things we don't want if we would ever think about something like this?
We just finished our emergency pod about Kyrie Irving on Locked On Mavs.
Everyone should do an emergency pod about Kyrie.
They should, especially if their names, like team's name, is mentioned in the report. And the Christian Wood situation for the Mavericks is kind of the same as the Kyrie one. He's expiring contract. They don't think that he's part of the long-term future. They're flirting with like a 2-year deal extension. Doesn't seem like Christian Wood really wants that. And so they're like, all right, well, if you're not going to sign me, then I'm probably going to sign somewhere else in the offseason. And so they have to get something for him. They can't lose him for nothing again, the same way they just did with Jalen Brunson, right? And so I think Christian Wood is part of this deal if they do that. They also have some contracts to get off of. Are you interested in a slightly used Latvian sharpshooter named Davis Bertans? Are you interested in the heir of a NBA Hall of Famer, Tim Hardaway Jr.? Are you interested in either of those? I think Christian Wood plus Tim Hardaway Jr., that money works. Straight up. And the Mavs have a couple of firsts to send if it requires that at that point. I don't know if it does at this point, but that's the deal that if I'm going to get all the way to be interested in Kyrie, and you would have to walk me down that road a couple of times to try and figure out, do I want to deal with this? Is this something that the Mavericks as an organization could handle? Then that's the deal that I'd think about. The Dinwiddie one is, by the way, Dinwiddie is questionable for the game tomorrow against the Warriors. He's had no injuries. He's had nothing happen to him, but he's absolutely questionable going into that game, which is hilarious to me.
Do you the couple of things are, one, if the Mavericks were interested in a move like this, are they viewing it as a rental for this season because they haven't necessarily been playing up to what their expectations were coming out of last year? Would they be, especially you talk about a couple of first round picks, at a certain threshold, then it becomes, we're going to try to make this thing work beyond this year with Kyrie Irving. To me, putting him next to Luka, you can really dream on how amazing that could look when they're on the court together, right?
Yeah, you don't have to sell me on the on-court pairing. I'm preaching to the choir here. It's the everything else that you guys have had to do podcasts on this past year that I've listened to, where it's Isaac brought this up on our emergency episode, was like, imagine just sitting there and like you have to watch all of Kyrie's Instagram live videos. Like that's been like decipher what he's saying. And that's been your life over the last stretch here. And yeah, like you have to, I think for the Mavericks, they would have to, and for any team, I feel like that if you're going to trade for Kyrie, if you're going to give up something, if you're going to give up something tangible, like if it's just Christian Wood and Tim Hardaway, then you're not really giving up much tangible. But if they insert like, all right, we got to beat the Lakers bid, so we got to put in a first, or we got to put in Josh Green, or we got to put in somebody else at the Mavericks value. Then if you're going to give up anything, then you have to know that, all right, we're signing off on this, and we're signing off on this for like a little bit of time. And so I think that, and with Kyrie, like he could just demand a trade, or he could just sit. If you like, all right, you guys aren't going to sign me to a long-term deal. I get traded to this destination that I didn't necessarily sign off on. I'm just going to sit. I don't care. I won't play. Like, right.
That's the hard part about it, and why the offseason potential, obviously the sign and trade option for the Nets in the offseason becomes a little bit more flexible around what they potentially could do. Do you trust this coaching staff? Like, the Jason Kidd era has had some rises and falls to the way that
a rise, a fall.
For sure. Yeah. Looking good, not so much.
A Western Conference Finals run, and then now this season.
So do you does that factor into it about if you're going to trade for him and if it's going to be beyond this season, or do you also have to do the mental gymnastics of like, is this the head coach that you want to have in place for this player to make this work?
Kyrie Irving, how much was he a part of running out Steve Nash? Because I feel like he was at least culpable in it. He's not going to care about Jason Kidd. Jason Kidd was brought in for the Mavericks as like, he's a Hall of Famer. He's a champion here in Dallas, like champion Jason Kidd. His name is written on the banner that we raise in the American Airlines Center. He's supposed to be like this player coach that can speak to Luka Doncic and speak to these star players. And let's move on from Rick Carlisle, who was a great tactician, but like players around the league did not like Rick Carlisle. So let's move on to a coach that players like, and like LeBron wanted to play for, and Lillard wanted to play for, and like in all this. I don't think Kyrie cares about that stuff. I think he would run that. I think he would run that out. And so, yeah, that's definitely an interesting scenario with all this.
It's funny too, because, once Jacques Vaughn takes over as the Brooklyn Nets head coach, whether it was Kyrie, Kevin Durant, everybody, anybody, nobody, in hindsight, you kind of say, well, Steve Nash might have done a good job of running himself out of Brooklyn, right? When you just see like the comparative of like the results on the court, but it is all fascinating. Do you want the Mavericks to make a trade for Kyrie Irving?
Me as a human, me as a person that covers the Mavericks, me as can I compartmentalize myself here?
Yeah, well, yes. As a fan of the team, do you want it? As someone who covers the team, it doesn't even matter. As someone who covers the team, you don't want it because there's the thing that comes along with it. But as a team that had higher expectations than what they're currently achieving, do you want them to make this move because, hey, it instantly makes us in a very soft Western Conference this season. It vaults us pretty high up there to be a contender.
It would make the team better. It just would. Luka and Kyrie together, that's the best offense in the NBA, right? Like who's better than that?
There'd be no better pairing. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, I mean, that it would make the team better. And if the Mavericks didn't have to give up, if they don't have to give up any picks, if they don't have to give up Josh Green, they still have another move to make. Where, all right, you bring in Kyrie, even if it doesn't work, you still can make another move later. Because right now, the Mavericks just don't have a ton of assets. And so we're sitting here, and even at this trade deadline, we're waiting for, are they going to make a move? Well, they can't make a small move. They have to make one big move because they're waiting for all their assets. They still owe a pick to the Knicks for the Porzingis trade.
Yeah,
Porzingis is gone.
He's playing for you.
He's gone. And so we're waiting for that. And so if they can pull off a move that's a risky move, but if they can pull off a move that gets them a star adjacent type person. He's starting in the All-Star game. This is wild that we're talking about Kyrie like this, but if they can get that player and then also make another move later, like you have to think long and hard about it. And I think eventually the Mavericks do it.
Okay. Last question for you. And by the way, check out the Locked On Mavs podcast. Cause it is just really, they got this thing covered soup to nuts. They do a great job.
What did you just say? We have it covered.
I said, that's chef's kiss.
No, what was the phrase you used after it?
Got it all.
Soup to nuts. What
soup to nuts. Yeah, you don't know soup to nuts?
No. What is that?
Your Midwestern. Your Midwestern personalities just don't know that. I don't know. Well, but to be fair, I have a lot of phrases that I use in my life that have been questioned by like my girlfriend, some other people. Like in my group, soup to nuts. Very
soup. Like good soup.
Yeah, soup to nuts. Yeah, soup to. I don't. It's soup to nuts.
Soup. I can't soup to nuts. Like two foods.
Yeah, soup to nuts. It's everything. It's everything from liquid to solids.
Isaac's the one on our show that he'll say a phrase and he'll like totally combine two phrases. Like head to toe has been one of the, instead of head to head has been one that he's used a lot of times, or he's like,
head to toe is a thing though.
No, but like he's saying the Mavs and the Warriors going head to toe in a game tomorrow, like instead of head to head.
No, that's not a real thing. Okay,
that's become a really funny one that we're
going. I've never heard. We got the Mavs taking on the Knicks head to toe. Going to be
head to toe.
If no picks were included, what is the most valuable player asset that you would then be willing to put in? Like, do the Mavericks have a most valuable, and really it's like young player, right? Like who's a player? Because so much about this trade scenario for the Nets league wide is being said, it's not going to be young talent. You're not getting like, a cornerstone kind of potential piece back. It's going to be veteran guys, expiring contracts, maybe draft capital. But if the Mavs were saying, hey, we may need that draft capital for something else, who's a player you'd be willing to put in?
Me personally, I would not be willing to put in Spencer Dinwiddie, but he's the one, right? Would you, as somebody that covers the Nets, would you rather have Dinwiddie right now for a run with Kevin Durant or Chris Paul?
Oh, that's a fascinating question. Yeah.
We were just talking about it on Mavs, and I couldn't decide what they would want, because like you'd think it'd be an obvious Chris Paul, but the way he's played this year, and Dinwiddie's been really good. He's like 17 points a game. He's playing next to Luka. He's shooting the ball really, really well, even better than he did in Brooklyn the first time around. Like he's like easy 40% 3-point shooter off the catch and pull up since he got traded to Dallas. It's been wild how much better he's been shooting.
And there's something, yeah, well, it's funny too. It's like there's something about for the Nets, a facilitator, a ball handler, which Spencer Dinwiddie can do, obviously.
Guy that knows the organization.
Right. And like Chris Paul is like such a pure point guard, but yeah, I don't. And what is Chris Paul making right now?
He's probably making a sandwich. I don't know. He's got they have a game tonight.
Probably making a well, I was more speaking from a contract standpoint, but I suppose, yeah, I guess
Chris Paul, 28.4 million this year, 30.8 next year, and then a $30 million like non-guaranteed that I'd have to look into to see.
Yeah, well, that's what's interesting too, because Dinwiddie just has 2 years left, 20 million this year. Like the number's about right, so that's like it's feasible. By the way, when I had put it out there like Spencer Dinwiddie and Woods, and you were like switch it over to Tim Hardaway, I was like, well, that just disgusts me. Like, how dare you try to give me a 3-year contract at 2 years after this at 20 million for Tim Hardaway Jr., like the throwaway product. Like that's the brutal part of this. I'd be fine with Spencer Dinwiddie. Like again, in the best of worst worlds, like I like Spencer Dinwiddie. I liked him when he was here. I think you can understand the value there. There's some question around whether or not like Kyrie Irving didn't necessarily like playing with Spencer Dinwiddie. Maybe Kevin Durant didn't necessarily like playing with Spencer Dinwiddie. And then the Spencer Dinwiddie himself, who was like, I'm ready to go be something more than the 6th man of the year coming off the bench kind of guy that he was for Brooklyn before that one specific run where he started getting a lot of starts. So like, I just don't know. And I guess like you're saying you're unwilling. It's funny too, because Mavericks.
Me personally, yeah. I don't know if the Mavericks aren't. Again, he's questionable for the game that they're playing tomorrow. So they may be looking at that. But I personally don't think I'm interested in putting Dinwiddie into a deal. And so you can do worse than Christian Wood and Tim Hardaway.
What about Ntilikina?
Take him.
I'm only going by age right now. I'm going specifically by age.
I'll drive Ntilikina to the airport.
Yeah. Oh, we can get Theo Pinson back too. Oh my God, we'll get everybody back.
Get the Vibes guy back. The Vibes have not been good. I don't know if the Vibes guy's been doing his job.
But what's like, speaking, if you're the Vibes guy, you are not doing your job. That would be the ultimate press conference from Jason Kidd if he just sat there being like, we've been disappointed in Theo, and they're saying, oh, like from a shooting percentage or a minutes. No, he has this Vibes thing he's responsible for.
The Mavs Vibes have not been good, and like we really just re-signed him for the Vibes. So he did get a tech on the bench the other day.
There you go. That's a vibe.
I guess that he added 1 point to the other team's score.
-1. The problem really for this is from a net standpoint. Don't give us picks, but let's talk about young talent. The Mavericks don't really have a lot of young guys. Like
no, it's Josh Green, who's in his 3rd year and playing really, really well, and like has become a really crucial player for the Mavericks. He should be a starter, and probably after the trade deadline, he becomes one. And then
I'm not mentioning Josh. I'm not going to mention him.
And then it's Jaden Hardy, who they Mavericks traded for a 2nd round pick, and he was one of the best players in high school, and then went to the G League and was really inefficient, and then was leading the G League in scoring this year, and it's like 15 points per game anytime you play him like 10 minutes or more. Anytime they get him out there, he's just a bucket. Very Cam Thomas-esque, I guess.
I was about to say, like
very redundant with that.
Guys, we got one of those dudes here.
We have one at home.
All right. At the end of the day, it looks like, yes, the Mavericks would be willing to explore this. There are some limitations to what they would do. And ultimately, it's to me, from everything you're saying, Nick, it's going to come down to how much draft capital are they willing to put in, because there's not necessarily player assets that you could push in there that would change from a Nets perspective. You're not going to get excited about Ntilikina coming back as opposed to a 1st round pick.
They at least have playable players that you can get back in a deal, right? You're not just taking like a Duncan Robinson or like a Davis Bertans. Like you're actually getting some players that would play.
Sweet Bertans, yeah.
The other thing is there may be no limit to how desperate the Mavericks get here really quick, because Luka's clock is ticking already.
Okay, but then let's close out on that. The Mavericks have not achieved nearly Western Conference Finals last year, and that was somewhat surprising. Like it was a great run, but it was a surprising run, and then they immediately come crashing back down to below earth in a lot of ways based on what you should be. Luka's young. You're never going to have a problem keeping him. You're always going to have him, but like there has to be a point here where organizationally you're like, we are also effing up in some capacity because we have not achieved nearly what we should be with one of the top players in the league.
Well, they've achieved. They went to the Western Conference Finals. They've taken the Clippers to 7 games a couple times. Like they've done things, but they haven't acquired. They haven't acquired they lost those. Those don't count.
Yeah, they didn't win those though.
They haven't gotten the talent around Luka that makes him feel comfortable, I think, and that's why you're seeing the frustration from him this season. And the offense when Luka sits is just absolutely brutal. And so, yeah, like the clock is ticking for Luka to. You got to make a move this offseason, in the middle of next season, even like that. That even seems like it's late because guys will ask for trades. Kevin Durant asked for a trade. The Mavericks aren't going to ever trade Luka probably, but yeah, it starts to go down that road. Like that's when the Mavericks will get desperate. They have to make some kind of move to make Luka happy, and they have pressure right now. There's reports that Luka has pressured the front office, and he's talking to the front office more than he ever did before. And so I think that could play a factor in all this Kyrie talk, is that the Mavericks could get desperate. And I don't know how desperate they're getting right now, but they could be. Also, I saw somebody in the comments, Al Max says, Mavs offer is trash. Yeah, man, they're all going to be trash. Like, yeah, all these offers are not going to be good.
So we did this because we did an immediate one where we came on just breaking the news, obviously. And it was this very clear thing of like, don't go into Team X and look for their best young talent or for the multiple draft picks. Like, this is what it's going to look like. It's going to be expiring contracts, veteran players, and then hopefully draft capital. Like, that's the state of where things are right now when it comes to Kyrie Irving. It's not, by the way, remember, in the offseason, the Brooklyn Nets, when Kevin Durant made his trade request, ultimately what they went to him and said was, you're too good. And there isn't a lot of there's no baggage with you, and you're under contract. Yeah. We can't give you away for for anything less than true value. Now it's about, can they manufacture true value? And I will say, if you're a Nets fan, don't worry about the players so much as the draft capital. Hearing that the Mavericks are maybe going to be desperate because Luka is starting to become a little bit dissatisfied with what's happening, that's the best case scenario 3 or 4 days ahead of the deadline, is that a superstar talent is saying, I need something to happen, and that can sometimes force a team to make a bit of a panic move, and that could be the best case scenario for the Nets. And that's why I think the Lakers are a very viable option, right? For sure. A team that's desperate to do something. So I put the Mavericks really on the market here for this one, and honestly, it's the picks for me, but I'll be intrigued to see if this starts to get a little bit of traction as it goes forward.
Another low-key Mavs thing to think about is Nico Harrison was a big executive for Nike for years. He was Kobe's Nike guy. He was part of the pitch for Steph Curry that didn't work. Like he's a lot of history with Nike. Right. And Kyrie was a huge Nike signature shoe guy. And so that's a connection to make. Kyrie was a Nike. I was going to say, although
Kyrie has recently been covering up those swooshes with some other things.
There's a connection there. And so maybe that plays into account here. And the Mavericks hired Nico Harrison for these relationships. And so maybe this is something that he gets done.
Oh, man, we can only hope and dream. Obviously, by the way, and we said this before, but I'll make it clear, and everybody knows this. And the reason why you hear the Mavericks being willing to discuss something like this is the best version of the Brooklyn Nets is with Kyrie Irving on the court, because he's that talented of a player. The Nets are going to be a worse team if a trade like this goes down. It's just a matter of whether or not you think there's a real long-term future with Kyrie, as opposed to another team, a Western Conference, who's going to be willing to commit some type of guaranteed money beyond this year. As I said before, you have Nick and you also have Isaac over on the Locked On Mavs podcast, smiling and providing you with all the updates around that Western Conference team that's hoping to push itself into the deeper playoff picture. And thanks, man, because this is what it's all about. Being on the Locked On Network means you get to reach out to people on a dime and then just pull them immediately into a live and demand very specific information about a potential trade.
That's what I'm here for, Adam.
You got it. And that is, of course, Nick Angstadt, once again, from the Locked On Mavs podcast. We always appreciate giving a little bit of time like this. Listen, you can sit here and say, and Al Mack, you got the shout out right there, right? And it's funny too. So I would take the trash if they throw in 3 picks. Otherwise, no. And this is funny, right? So the couple of things, right? The first thing for me is, this is why we really enjoy being on the Locked On Network. You do get to reach out to other hosts and guys that you talk with on a daily basis and say, hey, we're hearing this. What's the perspective from the other side? And it is a good way to get a sense of what's feasible here. I've reached out to a couple of the other guys, obviously the Kamenetsky brothers, who we've crossed over with before on the podcast, the Lakers guys. They will give a very not only calculated perspective around what they'd like to see the team do, but around the realistic possibility. And this is where you can start to get that framework. Like, can the Nets squeeze multiple first-round picks out of a team? It's always better to hear it from the other side, because we've talked about this. Yeah, take all of our bad stuff. And this isn't about Kyrie. This is saying, you don't like Joe Harris. He's cooked. He's lost a step. Let's send out his $18 million contract and bring back in John Collins, right? It doesn't work like that, because if you flipped it around from the other side, you're not going to get that same interest level from the team taking on what you don't want. Let's dive into the comments here a little bit. Want to touch on some of these other ones. The Lakers, again, specifically Bobby Marks. He was talking about some of his trade scenarios that could be looked at here, which I think are interesting. And again, inside of all of this is also the caveat. This can be a money play. This can be a contract negotiation play. Doug did mention earlier when we were on that the Brooklyn Nets, Sean Marks, and it's for better or worse, but they have shown a conviction, like with Kevin Durant. Now, he was already under contract at the time, but you made the trade request. If we don't get back what is real and true value for the talent that you are, we're not going to move off of it. So the Nets have at least shown a conviction around not blinking. Will they go that same route with Kyrie Irving, or does it feel like it's going the wrong way? And by the way, a couple of different things here. This is a good one. I'm putting this up here because King and everybody else who said it, this was coming through loud and clear also earlier about fire Sean Marks. Guess what? My opinion around what could happen, what should happen, what will happen with Kyrie Irving can be totally compartmentalized from what's gone on with Sean Marks. And we actually just talked about this when we were doing our trade discussion on yesterday's episode, which was just about, hey, will they make a move? Won't they? One of the things that Sean Marks has been good at is taking some reclamation projects, buying low, and then building up value like a Spencer Dinwiddie, reclaiming, having D'Angelo Russell and turning him into something, although that bleeds over from previous regime as well. But there is a part of his skill set as a GM that could be really applicable in these scenarios. And also, there's big misses. And that's something that we've talked about. Big swings, sometimes big misses. And if you told me that everything should go and it should be broken down to the studs, if the Kyrie Irving trade is going to happen, and then it's just a domino effect and now it's going to be the rebuild, and it's going to be Kevin Durant, and it's going to be Ben Simmons for pennies on the dollar, and Sean Marks is gone. I get it, right? There's no limit to what could be done here. It's going to be interesting to see what would happen, though. I want to take a look here. Spencer and Wood and Bertans for Kyrie and Simmons. Yeah, if you want to dump both of those. You could never lump Kyrie, and that's going to be over $70 million in cap salary. So I don't, that just from a financial standpoint isn't going to work. I don't believe, although I'll run it through. I'll run it through right now just to confirm it. I'll let you know how far off that money would be. You put in Bertans there as well. Who else did you get inside of that one? I don't want to miss it. Spencer and Wood and Bertans for Kyrie. Oh no, so that was it. 1, 2 for 3. Okay. That's not going to work because that's only it's actually only $9 million more to get that money to work on the Mavs side, but that's an unrealistic one. Again, there's no trade value there. Now, the one aspect that we can tap into here, you said Ed Hardaway, right? So that's actually a big number because I think he's on almost 19 million. So yes, you can do some combination of that if you wanted to make the money work. Let's take a pause on some of these trade talks for a second and just talk about the other thing that could happen here, which is if a trade goes through with Kyrie, what happens next, right? So the most important aspect is Kevin Durant. Does he understand that this could happen and you're okay with that? And we can try to retool and rebuild around you, and we're going to get back as much as we can, and we're going to build towards this offseason and on down the road, right? In that way, not dissimilar to the Harden situation of we're going to make the best of a bad situation and try to retool. The difference here being when you made the Harden trade, you had Kyrie. Now, if you make this trade and you have Ben Simmons, what's the next step? Do you look to just jettison the money of Ben Simmons' contract and now say, well, we've cleared $70 million off the books in these couple of trades, and that can afford us the ability to actually go to the market in the offseason and try to make a sizable move? You would immediately see a Joe Harris contract try to get shed too. Let's move off of that $18, $19 million. So all of a sudden, Seth Curry would be in there too. All of a sudden, which would be absolutely, tragic from a Nets fan standpoint, could the Nets shed $100 million in contracts and prepare to completely rebuild this thing specifically around Kevin Durant? It's at least maybe, and that's where the difference between what you get when it comes to the trade or what you would get in financial freedom. So that's the two sides of it, and I'll look at that a little bit deeper here. even before this Kyrie talk. What about shedding all these contracts, Green? Is that what you're referring to? Just dumping this and clearing room to rebuild again around Kevin Durant solely? Like, yeah, I mean, the bottom line is you still have Kevin Durant, at least we think, right? And the bottom line is if you can find a way to have him still be here, then you always at least have a chance to be competitive, right? If you can find a way to always keep Kevin Durant here, at least for the remainder of his contract, then you can find a way to be competitive. But you'd have to find a way to shed big money. Yeah, and this, by the way, you need a point guard to run the second unit, and that's a big part of this conversation too. That was from BK there, because if we're just talking practically, say you move Kyrie Irving, you're already thin at the point guard position, at the ball handler position. If you take Kyrie out of this equation, let alone the talent level, but just the skill set in the backcourt, just without worrying about who comes back in. Maybe it is a Spencer Dinwiddie, et cetera. But imagine just sitting there with the backcourt when you're staring down the barrel of Edmund Sumner and Seth Curry and Patty Mills, Cam Thomas, right? Like, you get into a real weird space there. And you would get some players back, veteran guys, certainly. But trying to be a functional team after a seismic trade like this, potentially, that's going to be a really hard lift as well. Kobe, the thing is, you have to give to get. The Nets want to win now. I think that we'd rather give Spencer than first or Josh Green. Rather get Spencer, you're saying. Yeah. Yeah, and that's again, that's the crapshoot here. Is it's if you make a move that is about, we'll get draft capital to utilize, that's valuable, but that's valuable after this year. It's not valuable right now. And the other way you can look at this too is, and we didn't discuss this earlier either, what's the world where the Brooklyn Nets, in a scenario where let's say they make the deal with the Dallas Mavericks, and it's about the picks, not about the players that are coming back. So if you said that you were going to go ahead and do the deal with, let's say it's Spencer Dinwiddie and Christian Wood even, right? And there's no picks involved, which obviously is not something that we would want to be going down the road of, but okay. Or sorry, and say you get a 1 or 2 first round picks. And let's say to get 2 first round picks, you have to turn around and say, not Spencer Dinwiddie, and put in Tim Hardaway Jr. Maybe that's the case, right? But let's say that it's Dinwiddie, Woods, and 2 first round picks. So what can the Nets accomplish with that capital? Can you move? What can you move to? Yeah, and by the way, I know I'm talking. Yeah, I know I'm leaving Ben Simmons out of this discussion in the backcourt. It's just difficult because of the way that he's been playing and because of his health specifically. Like, we don't know where he's going to be. If you can get again, you're not replacing one-to-one Kyrie Irving, but how much firepower and scoring would you need to surround additionally around Ben Simmons to allow him to continue to play the way that he's been? Point guard, facilitator, non-shooter, defensive player, right? And by the way, here's Juan Alvarez as a Mavs fan. And by the way, welcome in. I hope that if you're a Mavs fan or fans of the Lakers or the Clippers, I hope you're stumbling upon us here. And one thing that Doug mentioned earlier, which I'd love to mention again, is, man, if you're new to the room, hit that subscribe button. We really appreciate it on the YouTube channel. Want to see this thing climb up over 5,000. And big days like this can be big moments for us. But that being the case, just to paint this picture, say whatever version of it that it is, right? Because Wood is an expiring contract. And the Mavs want to move off of that. And then you have Dinwiddie or you have Tim Hardaway Jr. Say that you get 2 first-round picks out of it. You can turn around and start to think about what is another guy on the market that you can go target and immediately take those 2 picks and send them elsewhere. Few and far between those names. Some guys now we talked about previously before this came up. Naz Reid. A little bit of talks of extension with the Timberwolves, or that the asking price could be going up a little bit. Can you flip those to that, right? Maybe. The Mavericks, to me, is a really hard example of getting first-round picks. And by the way, we don't even know that first-round picks are on the table in this scenario. There's a world where guys are saying, yeah, expiring contracts, maybe a young-ish player, maybe a first-round pick. Like, that is the current state of how the league is looking at the risk reward of Kyrie Irving. So you also have to couch it in that. So, just to compartmentalize, we are talking very much the broad stroke what ifs, could be's, and not talking about percentage of likelihood that one of these things occurs. So just inside of this though, throwing Jaden Hardy, right? And it's funny because we were talking about that. If you missed it, Juan, with Nick Angstad saying he's a young player, showed a lot of scoring talent, can really get you buckets there quickly, thrived in the G League, and problem being is that we have a guy like that in Cam Thomas that, yeah, he can get you some scoring, but what's the value going forward? But what could you turn in? If you could squeeze out if you could say a couple first round picks are on the table, what can you pivot and use it on? Can that help you go acquire a Naz Reid and something? Can you go to the source? Vanderbilt's being talked about from Utah going to the Timberwolves. Can you go right to Utah and maybe get Vanderbilt into the mix? And what does that mean and what does it look like when you're talking about losing a guy like Kyrie Irving? Because now all the things you were talking about doing are really go out the window. And we talked about it. We talked about this earlier around how the thought that the Nets are going to be buyers at the deadline feels like it goes completely out the window because you're trying to safeguard for the future of, is Kevin Durant going to be gone? Are we going to be rebuilding? And then at that point, can we refill our coffers with as many draft picks as possible, knowing that we're going to just need to take shots at getting some young talent that we can develop? Okay. Let's move on to just to not quickly, but I want to just discuss the other ones that got thrown out there. I mentioned before the Lakers one. So we had said about that straight up deal that would involve Russell Westbrook. Let's assume that the Nets are interested or willing, even in the short term for this season, to take on that contract and ultimately really more about to have Russell Westbrook here playing with Kevin Durant. Let's assume that Kevin Durant signs off on that idea. Bobby Marks had said Lonnie Walker as a viable option to be sent back the other way and one first round pick. The Nets would be sending back Kyrie Irving and also Joe Harris strictly from a money balancing standpoint. But for whatever Joe Harris is not, you would find yourself at least getting some perimeter shooting that you're now surrounding Kyrie Irving, LeBron James, Anthony Davis. You have a perimeter shooter. That matters. The Lakers need more shooting. That works from a numbers standpoint. It ends up with the Nets keeping $2 million of extra cap room there. Again, I don't hate this one because at the end of the season, the Nets will effectively, if they don't want to bring back Lonnie, they don't have to. He's 24 years old, $6.4 million, end of the contract this year, $47 million for Russell Westbrook. That comes off the books too. So again, this is a scenario where you're looking at the money of Kyrie Irving and Joe Harris. You're talking about $56 million, $57 nearly million. That comes off the books. You cannot bring back or retain any of the guys that you brought in. You only pick up one first round draft pick, but now you do have a little bit more cap freedom. And then again, the next one comes, hey, can we move off of the Ben Simmons contract if we want to? If we think that it's over. The fascinating thing about him is it's clear that he's not fully healthy. There's the mental component of it too. But is he ever going to get back to being healthy? And how long do you wait for that possibility to come? Westbrook for Kyrie has been a 3-team trade. No way, KD. Yeah. And that becomes a little bit interesting too, in terms of bringing in a third team around the Lakers trade and saying, where can you dump it off to? I think I had looked at preview. This is going back even before any of this Kyrie Irving stuff. It was just the idea of, I like to have some fun inside of these trade waters sometimes. If you threw in another team, you got to find a team that has the ability to take on the money. Got to find a team that can send some things back out if they need to. For some reason, I had looked at the Hornets, I think, at one point of just dumping that contract, dumping the Russell Westbrook contract to the Hornets, who have been a bad team. If you are the Brooklyn Nets, what are you happy with? What are you comfortable with? Obviously, we had said before, well, you can squeeze in a PJ Washington here because you need that money to add up, but you got to find a way to clear it. Maybe, you say a Terry Rozier comes back in there and then the pick goes automatically. I just want to get a sense of it though. They're going to have to clear the Hornets, who have to clear nearly the same amount of money. Even with Rozier's 21 million going out, there's still another 20 million away from it. And there's other teams you can look at here, obviously. But the problem with that is The Nets don't gain any capital in a 3-team move like that, because all the capital that would be coming is going to go to that third team to take on the contract of Russell Westbrook. So that becomes a difficult lift there as well. Let's take a little pause here and just get into some of the comments if we can find it. Here's one again. I made a joke about this, a full joke about this. DeRozan and Caruso for Kyrie. That's never going to happen, because the Caruso right now is going to maybe garner multiple first-round picks, or at least that's the bar that Chicago is trying to set for him. I did put that one up, and you can look at something like, this is probably like shooting as high as you possibly could here in terms of the player you could bring back, and bringing back someone that would have real value. DeMar DeRozan, if you want to say DeMar DeRozan, I also threw Andre Drummond to make that money work. You can make that move. That's predicated on the idea that the Bulls aren't going to be going anywhere necessarily this year or the next year. That's the end of DeRozan's contract. He's a little bit older. DeRozan is, I'm actually trying to remember how old DeRozan is right now. DeMar DeRozan he's 33, right? So you get the rest of this year out of him. You get next year out of him if you want to, keep him. And that's a piece you get with a point guard in place. All of a sudden you can dream on at least being competitive. Like a DeRozan, Kevin Durant, and even Ben Simmons, Nicholas Claxton and some of these other supporting casts. That's a playoff team, right? It's not tight. I don't know if it's title contending. You have to make some other move there, but that's feasible. But what does that look like from a Chicago standpoint? You're not going to be high level competitive this year. And that's purely just from the standpoint of even putting in Kyrie, better player than DeRozan. Sure. But I don't think it changes what they do this year. And then you're talking about, are you able to bring him back? What you would technically save yourself from a Chicago standpoint is getting out from next year's contract, one more season with DeRozan. And then if Kyrie were to walk, or you're in a position to operate the sign and trade, that's one aspect we haven't talked about with these trading teams. If you get Kyrie, then you're in the position maybe to execute the sign and trade in the offseason, which is what Brooklyn could maybe look at if he's still here. But that one's like, man, that's like a dream one, like talking about a name like DeRozan is pretty high level. It's a pretty lofty aim here. The other one was the Clippers. We talked about this earlier. From Bobby Marks, he was saying for Mann, Leonard, Wall, and Covington. And for the most part, this one kind of got looked at as being like, okay, if you are the Clippers, and we talked about how this would be a needle mover because you're bringing in a player to the Clippers when you have Paul George, you have Kawhi Leonard, you like where you slot in Kyrie Irving on this team, and there's some potential beyond this year that they would want to keep him. If we flip that out, so they were talking Covington. I found that, so I forgot that John Wall's like making nothing right now, because he spent so many years getting so much money that it was absolutely insane. Terrence Mann, again, a little bit younger, 26 years old. And the other one that Bobby Marks at least threw in there was Leonard. See, like, here's the funny thing. Like, I don't need Leonard in this deal. Like, and that's more about making the money work than anything, because he's making 14.4. But I don't know if I need necessarily Kennard, excuse me. Yeah, I was saying Leonard. Apologize. Luke Kennard. Sending him out, like, maybe that's an interesting one there potentially. But I don't know if I want that coming back to me in that trade. Again, that's more functional players inside of this, at least. This is a play to get rid of Marks. Maybe it is, but and you could be right. And we've talked about this before. I'll say it again. I'm not telling you that anybody should be safe inside of this organization. But what I am telling you is, when Kevin Durant remember, the request from Kevin Durant was fire Steve Nash, get rid of Sean Marks, or I'm going to request a trade. He ended up requesting that trade. They stared it down. They said, we can't get value for you. Can't get, proper value for you. And at that point, they did ultimately let go of Steve Nash because the start of the season was a disaster. That was the right move anyway. But Sean Marks is still here. So at least at the highest level, it does feel like, right or wrong, that Joe Tsai and Sean Marks are on the same page together. So from the outside looking in, we can say you're going to lose another high-end talent. You're going to end up having to blow this thing up. You're going to lose Kevin Durant. All of those things can be true, but if the ownership and the GM are on the same page for better or worse, it's going to be hard to see them go, right? Yeah, I know. And a lot of people are saying about, like, if you're going to have to blow it up, and this is blow it up, or you're going to have to, trade Kevin Durant, obviously, or find another one to pair with him. And that's where, again, shooting for a high name. And I asked this to Doug earlier. Hey, is there any maybe disgruntled player that would prefer to be somewhere else or isn't going to be back on that second contract, et cetera, that maybe both teams benefit from swapping those, even if it just puts some trade value into the trading partner's pocket when it comes to Kyrie Irving? Maybe they get to have some value going to another season. But it's going to be fascinating. The only one, let's throw it here. What do you have here, Sacco? Realistically, trading Kyrie and thinking everything going to work smoothly after All-Star break is going to be, well, that's, again, if we think we made this, I hope we made this pretty clear. Like, that's the most damning part of this, is that in the short term, you're going to go from having, what, somebody mentioned this. Kevin Durant goes down with the injury. Ben Simmons is struggling, and he's being injured on and off the court. Kyrie Irving is playing excellent basketball. He's been, seemingly he's been leading the team, right? And whatever you want to say about what they have or have not been able to accomplish in the absence of Kevin Durant, there's been some terrible games, obviously. We know that. But they have kind of achieved the goal of, like, keeping it together, right? Boston, OKC, San Antonio, Phoenix, the 4 straight losses. But they beat Utah and Golden State. They lose to Philly. The loss to Detroit is a mess. But then they beat the Knicks and they beat the Lakers. Now, the Lakers rested LeBron and AD, so it wasn't okay. You still got the win, right? And then you lose, obviously, to Boston in absolutely disastrous fashion. But that makes them right now, without Kevin Durant, 4-7. And you have Washington coming up, then LA, then Phoenix. Last 3 games before the deadline. And in theory, Kevin Durant is nearing his return from his injury. It's been, around the All-Star break, probably going to be after the All-Star break. But just the idea that, like, hey, say you beat Washington, you lose to LA, and then maybe you beat Phoenix, right? Say you beat Phoenix, and you get yourself to what? A 6-8 and even 5-9. It's not perfect. It's not what we thought was going to happen, but it's like they were. It's been messy, but they've been able to, like, tread water here a bit. They've been able to hang on and stay in the mix in terms of, remember, we talked about don't fall too low in the standings. Well, the Nets haven't. They're the 4 seed right now. They're just a half game up over Cleveland, but they are 3 full games up over Miami. And I think when we discussed it, I said, just don't be lower than the 6th, right? Because if you're still within the 6th seed, it means you're still within striking range. When KD comes back, you get ramped back up, you start winning more ball games, and you push yourself back into a top 4 seed. And you feel pretty good about it. You fight for that 3 seed maybe, but at worst, you feel like you can get to that 4 seed. They're still holding on. Some of that's a product of what the teams around them have done. Just 500 basketball from the Cavs, 6-4 ball from the Heat. The Knicks are 4-6. The Hawks have won 6 out of their last 10, but no one's been doing anything of substance, right? So you haven't had to worry about tumbling too far. That's the most disheartening. That's one of the most disheartening parts about it. Is you've actually accomplished the thing of not suffering too much in the absence of Kevin Durant, and you have a trade request from Kyrie. What do we got here? It's not just about what makes the Nets better, but what other teams would get out of it, which is why the only real trade partners are the Knicks, Mavs, and Lakers. I said the Knicks before, which I don't think the Nets would ever, want to do. But and Doug, we were kind of labeling what teams we thought could be in or out. And he kind of swooshed that to the side, that the Knicks wouldn't want to do that. I can understand wholeheartedly why they wouldn't want to, and I can understand why they would, because they are this missing piece away. They didn't choose to go after Donovan Mitchell in a big way this offseason when they could have. They got Brunson. They have some nice pieces, but they don't have enough, right? And obviously it'd be a seismic shift. We can even, I'll take a look at that one for the fun of it, for the pure fun of it. When Doug's away, Adam will play trade machine mayhem. Did you talk about the fact that Kyrie is not on the injury report tomorrow? Yeah, as of right now, Listen, I understand what you're saying, and Nick Angstadt mentioned that there about how Dinwiddie suddenly appeared on the injury report after being totally healthy and available. So you understand how that looks. But I don't think I'm not gonna read anything into it until it officially until something until we get closer to it. And if he's a healthy scratch, he's a healthy scratch. Like, I think, how's it going to look? It's going to look like a very public negotiation that's occurring around a contract and around an extension and around the trade deadline. And it kind of is what it is. We also got a great shout out from over on Twitter for KZ Cage. Soup to nuts. He's going to use that in Australia. Doesn't know what it means, but he's using it. Anyway, so yeah, it's, there's obviously a lot of factors here, but again, it's a mess. So I think optics and that kind of stuff, who cares at this, right now in this moment, who cares? Nets got to figure out if they're going to lose another superstar here or not, and if they're going to be able to remotely get value, right? Best trade partner is the Bulls. They're the only ones that have pieces that can actually make us better in Levine, Vucevic, and Caruso. Yes, I 100% agree with you, but I agree with you that they have pieces that can make you better. The Clippers have pieces that can make you better. Kawhi Leonard, Paul George. The Lakers have pieces that can make you better. LeBron James, Anthony Davis. Chicago has players that are attractive. Chicago is different in that it doesn't look like they're high level competitive right now. And maybe there's some contract shedding to go on there, but that's not the kind of thing that's going to come across the line here. Even if you were willing to say, like, hey, Chicago, like, we really would like is to get our hands on Caruso. Just, we'd like to have that veteran point guard in our backcourt, and we're losing Kyrie and it's a mess. But even if you do that and you say, we get it, you wanted multiple first round picks, so we'll devalue what we're doing here. Making the money work becomes next to impossible without going up the food chain. And then at that point, you're Chicago and you're saying, so we gave up Vucevic and DeRozan and Caruso, et cetera, and we got back Kyrie Irving. That is, it's not going to function for a lot of these teams. Slick back in the fold here. I think we can make a trade work with the Bulls if we do a 3-team trade with the Lakers and the Bulls. Chicago is looking to rebuild and would move off Levine, send Westbrook and picks to Levine, Westbrook picks to Bulls, and Levine to the Nets. Yeah. There are 3-team scenarios that I do think start to make things more interesting. I'd be curious about Chicago and their approach to, like, eating a bad contract and really going into the rebuild. Because I had talked with CEO Hayes from Locked On Bulls a while back, where he said, like, they're kind of set up in a nice way as they currently stand. And then I'll get to you, Jamal. I see up there. He had said they're kind of set up in a nice way. And I think the reason he mentioned it that way is when you go over, so the Bulls have their first round pick via Portland in 23, 24, they have it. They don't have 25, but they have their 26, 27, 28, and 29. They got all their normal picks there moving forward. So their picks are pretty well in place. And then from a roster standpoint, they have DeRozan, who after next year will be up. They have other contracts like Levine. He's the only guy on a big contract on a long term. Vucevic is an expiring deal. You have Lonzo Ball. He's had his injury issues, etc., but he still has 2 more years after this one on the books. And then it's all low-level stuff. So, like, the Bulls are sort of set up in this way to be like, if we have to go and rebuild, we can go do it. We don't necessarily need to make these moves to shed these in this way. And if they wanted to, I guess I'll put it this way. If you're Chicago, you can look to the Lakers and say, hey, what does the deal look like here? You want to shed Westbrook's contract and throw us a couple, young player, a couple other expiring deals. We'll send back a DeMar DeRozan or a Levine or et cetera. Like, I think that's a part of it too. The 3-team deals can make a lot of sense for Brooklyn to get something done. But then sometimes you have to take a step back and say, but could those 2 teams just meet up and accomplish that goal on their own? And then that can ultimately say, so why do we need to include Kyrie in something like this? Jamal, do you think the Nets should ship Kyrie and KD together for a haul of young players and chips? So I'm going to assume the reason that you put it this way is that if you have Kevin Durant being traded, then you're increasing the draft capital you're getting in return. You're selling that team on the idea that you can extend Kyrie Irving and keep those 2 together, and then you can move forward. I get the idea. Again, you'd be talking about, what is it, 7? What is Durant currently making? 44. So you're talking about $80 million in salary, a little bit more. That's going to be really hard to accomplish no matter where you're going. And again, like what teams out there have enough of everything to make that type of move? Even, and I'm fine, by the way. These are, I like doing these. I like doing the broad stroke what if scenario. So I'm happy to have them. You know, like what teams out there have the draft capital to say, all right, we'll give you what, 4 or 5 first round picks to get Kevin Durant, and we're sort of taking Kyrie with you. We'll send back a couple of players as well. We got to make the money match. You know, name the number of teams that could truly achieve that. Now, and then listen, I'll have fun. Chicago could go ahead and achieve that, right? Like they could turn around and say, hey, it's not working out for us, and we're going to go ahead and flip all these things and, you know, and make this thing happen where, let's see, ready? Let's paint a picture. You know me. If you're looking to paint the picture, I'm looking to have that discussion. So let's say, and we'll do Vucevic, because I got to find a way to get at least close to this money to start. This is the best. Hey, there you go. Successful trade. The Brooklyn Nets get DeMar DeRozan, Vucevic, Alex Caruso, and Lonzo Ball for Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. Keep Levine in Chicago, who's under the long-term contract. Boom. You could make that deal happen. So if you want to go down that road, you certainly can. Let's see what else we got. I love it, though. I love these ones. Send Kyrie and KD to the Knicks so I can watch them play every game. Yeah, I like that. 55 years a Nets fan. Dump Marks ASAP moron. Yeah, that's okay. You can put those vibes out there too, right? You can lambaste the front office right now. Good for you, Curvin. Yeah, I like it. What about the Celtics? Tatum or Brown? Yeah, make it happen. That's an easy deal, right? Easy deal. Kyrie back to Boston. You know, it's sorry, and let me just make sure. I don't know if this is, let me see here what we got. I wasn't saying all of them for Kyrie. I was just saying, I got you. Yeah. No, so I hear you. And that's what and I'm glad you got back in, and I'm glad that I saw it. Yeah, some combination therein can work, right? And let's just, we can clean that one up here for a second and say, let's go ahead and reset this one. So if you just want to send Kyrie to Chicago in a bit of a dump, I personally, if you're talking about wanting to keep Kevin Durant and try to make something happen here, then I'm a fan of like looking at DeMar DeRozan, a veteran player, only has this in next year, so you can always revisit what that looks like. And that one, if you're just talking about players' names, they only have to get, it only takes an extra, so 2.7 off the books for Chicago. And that's where I put in the Drummond. I think I did this earlier. You could throw Drummond in there, and that gets the job done. If you want to really make a push and you say something like a Kobe White, maybe, right? And that's a little bit more money and does work going the Nets way. But Kobe White is on the final year of a deal too, right? And then you figure out picks if you want to. What does that mean for the Bulls? I don't know, but it's an option. Like it's certainly something you could do if you could convince them to do it. Dinwiddie and a pick makes the most sense for Kyrie. Yeah, have to add something else in to make the money match. But again, like if you have to make a move like this, I like Dallas. Couple of picks. Give me a Spencer Dinwiddie because he can function, he can play in Brooklyn, and then add something else in there. Jamal back in the mix. The Thunder can trade for KD and Kyrie. Yeah, without trading SGA. What do you think about that? Even though it'd be very complicated. Yeah, again, like from a complicated. Well, let's put it first of all. I'm not willing to say that I'm trading Kevin Durant yet. Okay, my number one goal is to keep Kevin Durant. My number one goal is if Kyrie Irving's done and he's not going to play out this year, my number one goal is keeping Kevin Durant and finding ways to keep him happy. If you start talking about but they can't do it though. Like they couldn't pull that off for both of them anyway. I'm doing this very quickly here, just so I can get a sense of where the numbers lie. So just say you wanted to do both of those guys to OKC. So OKC, and I just did this just so I would know. I put Dort going out, right? 15 million. With 80 million to clear off the books, OKC would need to cut an additional 61 million. They can't accomplish that in any capacity. They have nobody making any money except for SGA. So no, you can't. You actually couldn't. You wouldn't be able to accomplish that. But no big deal. What do you have here? Dinwiddie for another shooter is somehow okay, but you watch how Dallas offenses run. What a difference with them in Nets. Yeah. Anyway, no. And by the way, no, the Nets don't want Westbrook. That again. Let's rewind this thing all the way back because I'm having a ton of fun, by the way. I have no limitations for running through random trade ideas and machines and seeing if things can work up, whatever. It's all awesome. But rewind this back to where it all stands right now. If the Nets are going to have to trade Kyrie Irving, just Kyrie Irving, it's not going to be for young talent. It's going to be for expiring contracts. Even in the Westbrook scenario, it's just because it's 47 million and it comes off the books at the end of the year. That's what matters for Brooklyn in probably the highest level if you have to make a trade like this. I saw one from a Lakers fan. Here we go. Hoopers breakdown. Lakers fan, but Kyrie and KD are my favorite players in the league, so I've been rooting for Brooklyn. But give us Kyrie. Yeah, sure. Wish you guys well. You guys been very objective and fair in this. Oh, thank you, man. Yeah, listen, that's the agenda here. And I know this has been a much more looser and fun one, but our initial live that we did with myself and Doug Norrie, like really just talking about the nuts and bolts of this thing, what it means, what the Nets can accomplish, what it's going to look like. There's just a reality to it. And by the way, like if the Lakers start coming a calling here, and those are the reports too, that the Lakers have maintained an interest or at least have been monitoring, and Kyrie Irving was still talking about it. Remember, we said going back to it, nothing happened in the offseason. Kevin Durant didn't get traded, which means you didn't have to start blowing things up when it was talked about Kyrie to the Lakers initially. Now, though, again, it was still always the premise. It can end up in the offseason when Kyrie's still going to want to go and sign with the Lakers and play with LeBron James. And guess what? LeBron James, Anthony Davis, and Kyrie Irving. Yeah, that is a Western Conference real juggernaut. If they're all healthy, I say that for Anthony Davis specifically, but those three guys on the court together, that's going to be a rough one for the Western Conference, which, by the way, like that's a part of this too. The teams that are willing to think about making these trades are going to be teams that can say, we go from being competitive to being high level this year. And if you think, the Lakers are a good example, that getting Kyrie Irving can get you a chip this season, that's a big needle mover. That is a massive needle mover. Unlike, for example, and then we'll get to Michael Stokes, unlike the Mavericks, who maybe say, is it going to be the best backcourt pairing? Sure. However, does it ultimately vault you to being title contender number one in the Western Conference? That's debatable, right? So that matters in terms of what teams would be willing to give up. Any chance this is a negotiation tactic by Irving, or do you think Pandora's box has been open with him? No, it's definitely a part of the negotiation tactic for sure. So I talked about earlier, and we said it too. They've been through this with Kevin Durant. Kyrie Irving wants the contract extension. He doesn't want the stipulations, and he's saying, "Hey, if you're going to try to put these stipulations in here about play time and games, games and etc., you might as that's it. Then I want out." So yes, you can be trying to force the hand of Brooklyn to say, "Whoa, we didn't want to have you walk this year. We didn't want this to be over right now at the trade deadline." But even then, you said before, the organization is willing to stare back at the abyss and say, "Okay, we're not trading you." So now if you don't want to play out the rest of the season, which is far more of a risk with Kyrie Irving than it ever was going to be with Kevin Durant, so be it. But we're not going to give into this particular tactic. So yeah, I think it can be a both and. Trade him to Detroit. There you go. No, and you know what? And it's funny too, man, because again, from an on-ball standpoint, love Kyrie's game. I hope that he can stay here. The one thing that I will say, and this is about Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant, James Harden, Ben Simmons, Sean Marks, Joe Tsai, Joe Harris, Nicholas Claxton, LaMarcus Aldridge, Blake Griffin, everyone, Spencer Dinwiddie, every single iteration and version that has been this team over these last few seasons. It hasn't, we talk about this, right? What they can be, what they could be. We've gotten the sample size. For whatever the reasons, on, off court, indifferent, injuries, and otherwise, this team hasn't gotten beyond the second round of the playoffs. Like that's what it is. And at a certain point, you have to look at the sample size as being more indicative of what's going to be, as opposed to being the outlier of what should be. Because on paper, it should be a lot better and should have been a lot better, but it hasn't been. So that's a really hard part for me when it comes to this. I feel like the Nets may need to cave here. They just won't be able to get anything close to his value. They are a legit contender with him. What more could you ask for as a team? No, and this would be Doug's. This would be Doug's stance. Is you are a title contender with him. You are not a title contender without him. So you cannot afford not to keep him. You cannot afford to not cave and to extend him. And that might be true. But again, and I've gone back and forth on this, because when they were running here good, when Kevin Durant was healthy and Kyrie, and it was happening even with a mediocre Ben Simmons, they were pounding out wins. It was, hey, they really are. They can be as good as anybody. But in the off season, when we had the discussion, can this team do it or not? I ended up falling on the side of, I don't think they're ultimately going to win a title, and therefore you should not feel beholden to keeping any particular player or not being open to whatever it may look like. I could be proven wrong on it, but I don't think that this team right now, healthy, Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant, Ben Simmons, I don't think that this team is going to win the title. Now, if Ben Simmons gets healthy over the remainder of this year and comes back next year and looks a little bit better, maybe. But then you got to worry about Kevin Durant injuries. You got to worry about Kyrie Irving, even injuries and otherwise. You got to worry about Ben Simmons and re-aggravating. So when you look at the Eastern Conference, even look at Milwaukee, look at Boston, you can look at Philadelphia too. I think the Nets are right there, but they're probably just this little half a step behind. And a lot of it is mostly predicated on, I haven't seen you do it. So until I see you do it, I can't assume that you're going to. And that maybe Boston and Milwaukee are in their own category. And then you have Philly right there. And then you have Brooklyn. Anything else before I get out of here? Oh, no, by the way, and it's a good thing to bring up, Range. And this is like, so we'll close out on this. And actually, I will mention the Miami scenario that was painted by Bobby Marks. Let me be clear. We're discussing the fact that this is where it currently stands. This is what's been demanded by Kyrie, and this is the possibilities that lay ahead. We went back when it came to the start of this season. We said, hey, the comments by Kyrie, the posts on social media, felt a little tone deaf, right? Could have been an easy apology. Didn't want to do that. Gets suspended. Brooklyn could have said, hey, you served your suspension. Welcome back. Let's move forward. They didn't do that. They made a list of things that he had to accomplish and little boxes that he had to check. And I thought it was incredibly petty. We said of the organization to lay out that kind of thing for Kyrie Irving to, quote, get back in the good graces. So again, in the overall history of this organization with these players, there's been missteps on all sides. So it's not about that. It's just about right now, they're negotiating. Kyrie Irving's demanded a trade, and whether or not the Nets are going to do it. But we've talked about it so much that we don't bother including that in this right now. But we've done those pull back, bird's eye view. What does this look like? What have been the problems? What have been the pitfalls? Where's the organization? Sean Marks, Joe Tsai, where have they made mistakes as well along the way? The last one that because I didn't mention this before, the Bobby Marks one was Kyrie for Lowry, Vincent, and Martin. That was the one that he laid out for them. And I think, I don't know, seeing some of the media members were talking about, You may not love the idea of like a cooked Kyle Lowry. You can at least now, again, short term, you can say, well, he's an NBA level starting point guard. You know what you get from him. It's not going to be as good as it used to be, but you can say that there is still value right now in him on this team. If you make a move like that and you say, we can still have him be a table setter for Kevin Durant. We can have him be a tenacious, violently undersized guard on defense. He can knock down the perimeter shot, even if he's struggled there, even if a lot of things have struggled for him. But there's something there that you could squint and see, hey, maybe there's something. Now, he still has another year after this one, which I think is interesting, because then you have to consider that. Vincent is 26, so you like that a little bit better as far as an age standpoint. And the other one, who did he say? Oh, what was the other one? Oh, and Martin. Yeah, and then Martin, 27. You get him in the mix, low level, but and then again, and then you can start discussing what it looks like from an asset standpoint. I remember when we discussed the Kevin Durant trade request, how it would be interesting to think about Kevin Durant in Miami, because his personality and demeanor, just like Dame Lillard, feels like a guy that fits with what Miami is as an organization. Kyrie Irving doesn't feel that same fit, but maybe it can thrive. Like, can that thrive with a Jimmy Butler and a Bam Adebayo? I mean, you can think about what that would be on the court. And this would kind of maybe be like the all-in push from Miami, who's, floundering right now. They're just hanging out in the 6th seed. They're not quite, doesn't look like they're quite going to be what you would want. So maybe they try to make this push, because they've been a team that's very capable of taking swings, retooling, right? Building back up. When they went and got Jimmy Butler, remember when they went and got Jimmy Butler after Philadelphia, it was, man, how's that going to work? And oops, there you go. They became one of the hardest outs in the playoffs for the Eastern Conference, because that's what they're built to be. But now some guys are getting a little bit older, and you're going to see some value diminish there. All right. That being the case, my friends, I want to come back on, obviously just reiterate what has gone on here around the Brooklyn Nets. Shams Charania first reported that the trade request went in from Kyrie Irving, that it was also reported that, was disgusted with some of the language that was being included in the contract extension. We haven't gotten anything that I've seen yet as far as specific details around it. I'll take one last little swing here on Shams, just to take a look if he updated anything as far as, okay, so here you go. 1 hour ago, we have the clarification of, and let's take a look at this too. LA Lakers, Phoenix Suns, and Dallas Mavericks have emerged as potential suitors for Brooklyn Nets All-Star starter Kyrie Irving, sources tell The Athletic. And then this is just going back a few hours, when the Nets recently offered Kyrie Irving an extension with guarantee stipulations. Sources said the offer, which was declined, was not well received from Kyrie Irving. That's the last one here, was the Phoenix Suns. Somebody had mentioned this. They'd thrown it out there as just being a potential possibility. The interesting thing is, and we talked about this with Nick earlier, what is the name coming back here? Right? This is it going to be the Chris Paul trade, right? Chris Paul looking like he's, kind of falling on hard times here a little bit. And do you think that the Phoenix Suns are going to be willing to give up anything remotely young? You're going to try to pair him with Devin Booker. That would be Kyrie Irving. So if we send Kyrie Irving there, Chris Paul, who has 2 more years after this year on his deal, Chris Paul and Crowder for Kyrie Irving. Money works on that one. Crowder, who wants to be traded, they're trying to seek a trade for him as well. So there's a possibility maybe there if they're emerging as a suitor. That keeps you away from young players. It gets the money to work, and then you can talk about capital. You can talk about picks, another day. But that at least gets the deal done, which would be really interesting to see. I'll just do a quick little double check before we get out the door on the Suns. And the Suns, who have plenty of capital going forward. They have all of their picks all the way through, first and second round picks all the way through 2029. So there'd be no shortage of what they could offer into that deal if they wanted to. And then you can start to think about having now you're looking at the Phoenix Suns as being a team that has Devin Booker and Kyrie Irving. You still have Ayton. You still have Bridges. You still have Johnson, excuse me. If it were me, yes. If I were the Nets, I'd be pushing hard to say, hey, I'd love to get Johnson in this deal somehow. Like, I'd like to get one young player out of this if I could, and I might forego an asset potentially to do so. Because the last thing about this is, yes, getting draft capital back is nice, but getting back proven commodities matters too. So all those things, man. All of those things and so much more. That being the case, $120 on the clock. Good a time as any, man. We'll be back in. I've reached out to the Lakers. I've reached out to the Heat, reached out to the Suns already as well. We talked with Nick from the Mavericks. Over this weekend, if we can connect with these guys, also reached out to the Clippers. We're going to try to get on with them and get a sense of what it looks like from the other side and what some of these packages would look like. When we talk to Nick, we understand, doesn't want to give up Spencer Dinwiddie. Doesn't want, maybe you could twist his arm on a younger player, but probably not, right? Couple of picks. So 2 picks plus a Woods and a Tim Hardaway Jr. That seems feasible coming from the Dallas side. Maybe you push them for another pick, or maybe you push them for Spencer Dinwiddie instead. Possibility there. We'll flesh out what these other trade options could look like, and then we'll see. Because we'll hear within the next 24 to 36 hours, what are the Nets saying back around this? What is coming back here? Are they pushing to talk with Kyrie? Try to extend negotiations, try to get back to the table on these things? Or are they looking at it as things are done, unraveled from that standpoint, and it's just time to cut ties and move on? Because that very much can be the case here. Taking a look here just one more time. Okay. So that'll do it. Really appreciate everybody who was in here, everybody who came in earlier today as well. When we broke this live, we were on for a little under an hour. If you didn't do it then, if you did it now, subscribe over on the YouTube channel. We're pushing towards 5,000. Big days, big moments like these, we really try to work our butts off to be available around, to show up, to discuss it, to talk about everyone that's in the chat and having these conversations. So if you can help support us, please go do so. And we'll go ahead and continue to break these down throughout the weekend and into next week as we approach that deadline. And we'll see. Could be more seismic changes for the Brooklyn Nets organization in the short and the long term. And you know that you can always come right here to the Locked On Nets podcast for all your coverage. Thanks again for spending a lot of your time today with us. Me, along with Doug Norrie, we'll be back again talking all things Brooklyn Nets basketball.